Angels were taking Lot's wife to safety, but she looked back and she was turned into salt. Jesus specifically asked us to remember this account, to remember Lot's wife who turned back when she was being taken to safety. Why? Jesus mentioned only a handful of Old Testament characters. But here he commands us to remember this woman whose name we don't even know. And he mentions her as a warning. She missed her rescue. Is it possible that we can miss our rescue too? The rapture. In this episode, we'll discuss that shocking concept. Now, our community believes that Scripture interprets Scripture, and that only Scripture can answer this question for us. This channel and its community comments exist to help you discover those Scriptures and what they might mean. Feel free to subscribe and join us on this quest. Let's turn first to Jesus' interpretation of the Old Testament account of Lot and his family in Luke 17. We read, "It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just the same on the day the Son of Man is revealed." Jesus explained that what happened on the day Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed was an analogy for what will happen on the day of the Lord, the day that Jesus is revealed. But Jesus didn't stop there. On that day, the day of Jesus' return, the one who is on the housetop and whose goods are in the house must not go down to take them out. And likewise, the one who is in the field must not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. In this warning portion that we really want to explore today, Jesus gives us 3 examples of how on that day, the day of the Lord, the day of the rapture, we are not to try and get our stuff. Why is that? Why does Jesus warn us? The only explanation is that there is a real opportunity to not go with our angel rescuers, a chance to not go in the rapture. Why else would Jesus have given us this warning? Now, if you watch most videos on this subject, they spiritualize Lot's wife's hesitation to be about general materialism, valuing the things of this world over Jesus, and certainly we should not value our things above God. But I want you to notice, Jesus wasn't talking in general terms. He was talking about the day of his return. He said, on that day. So to understand, we need to dig deeper into Lot and his wife's story. Lot, as many of you know, was the nephew of Abraham. And with Abraham, he traveled from the city of Ur in Mesopotamia to Canaan, which would eventually become Israel. Genesis 13 tells us that Abraham and Lot pitched their tents between Bethel and Ai, and strife arose between the herdsmen of Abraham and the herdsmen of Lot. This tells us right away that Lot was a fairly wealthy guy with flocks of his own and workers of his own. Now, Abraham had a very gracious solution to the problem, one that would impact the Sodom and Gomorrah story. So Abraham said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left." Basically, Abraham decided that he and Lot had too many livestock for the land that they were grazing on, and they needed to go and distance their flocks from one another. And here is the important point. He allowed Lot to choose. He gave Lot the right to decide what land he would take. And like most of us would, Lot chose the most economically attractive land. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, just like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. As you go to Zoar, so Lot chose for himself the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. The Bible tells us the land was like the Garden of Eden, or like the Nile Delta, and Scripture is clear to add that this was before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that the Jordan Valley wasn't like that afterward. And if you've been there, it's a desert. The Bible adds to this account. Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. So Lot chose to live among the wicked, probably because he would fare better economically. He was a herdsman, so it's a real question why he would settle in the cities of the valley or live next to these wicked sinners. But it seems Lot valued economics more than he did righteousness or his chosen profession. So was this a wise decision on Lot's part? Well, obviously not, knowing how the story ends. Lot lost his possessions, he lost his wife, he almost lost his life. So making decisions based strictly on economics is not always the wisest thing to do. Also, notice Lot's wife wasn't mentioned at this point in the account. It is possible then that Lot married a local girl from Sodom. Again, if that's true, maybe it wasn't the wisest thing to have done either. Things did not go well for Lot in Sodom, even from the start. We learn in Genesis 14 that he was taken captive in the War of the Nine Kings, and Abraham had to rescue him. Sometime later, when the Lord visited Abraham to prophesy about the birth of Isaac, the Lord also told Abraham he was about to destroy Sodom. The Lord said, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to this outcry." Abraham, who was likely worried about Lot, began to bargain with God. "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it?" And then he began to bargain on down. First 50, then 45, and on and on and on, until finally he got to 10. Abraham pleaded with God not to destroy the city if there were 10 righteous within it, and the Lord agreed. So this tells us there weren't even 10 righteous in the city since God destroyed it. 2 of the angels who had come with God went down into Sodom, and there they were met by Lot, who was sitting at the gate. And he said to them, "Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night." This tells us a couple things. First, it tells us that Lot, who was originally living in a tent outside of Sodom, now had a house right in the middle of town. And he was sitting in the gate. This implies he had a position of some authority. Lot had moved right into the center of Sin City. This was the most unwise of all his decisions thus far, and knowing what happened, you can see why. Did his wife have something to do with that? Maybe. And second, his offering of his house to strangers, who were angels, said he knew very well about how the men of Sodom would treat strangers. In fact, the angels originally turned him down on his offer to stay at his house, but Scripture says he pleaded with them to come to his house. And here is why. The men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, and they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may have relations with them." Notice this passage says both young and old, all the people, and that they came from every quarter. That is a mob, a riotous mob of deviant rapists. And because Lot was so insistent that the angels stay at his house, and because this mob formed so quickly, it is probable that he had seen this kind of thing many times in the past, and in fact, possibly experienced it himself once. We also know from the Apostle Peter, he rescued righteous Lot, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men. For by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, who was Lot, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. Peter tells us Lot was tormented by the actions of these men day after day. So this wasn't a one-time thing. But not tormented enough to leave Sin City. Why? We can only speculate. Maybe because his wife's family was from that city. His daughters had even become engaged to young men of the town. Maybe that kept him there. And maybe it was economics, or perhaps it was all three. The angels blinded the men of Sodom, and early the next morning it was time for them to rescue Lot. Lot first went to his future sons-in-law, but they thought his warning was a joke, and they didn't go with him. When Lot returned to the house, he hesitated, so the men seized his hand, and the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out and put him outside the city. Now up to this point, everything we've said about Lot's wife is somewhat guesswork. But now we are ready to come to the account of Lot's wife. The Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife, from behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. After having been warned not to look back or go back, Lot's wife disobeyed, and it cost her her life. But what probably happened? Notice she walked behind her husband, which was the custom in those ancient days. So it is very likely that she did this at first without Lot even realizing it. And although Genesis says she looked back, Jesus seems to indicate that maybe she began to go back. Likewise, the one who is in the field must not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. He also seems to imply she went back either for loved ones or possessions. Either way, it was an extremely poor decision since the angels had specifically warned them not to go back. What exactly happened? Well, we aren't told, but there are a few possibilities. We know the fire and brimstone was incredibly hot. The ruins of the buildings of the city still remain. Originally, they were made of limestone, but now they have been turned to ashes that crumble when you touch them. That's a clue. This occurred when the brimstone, which we call sulfur today, reacts with limestone, which the buildings were constructed of, and it forms calcium sulfate ash and a toxic gas. So maybe she was first overcome by the fumes. And considering this is a salty area, did salt then encrust her body? And is this the way Lot found her when he went to look for her? Well, maybe. Another possibility is that she was vaporized, a very likely possibility. The fire and brimstone that day was unearthly hot, 6,000 degrees, the heat on the surface of the sun. And that type of heat can vaporize a person instantly. This picture on the screen is from Hiroshima, and what you see is the remains of a person vaporized in the atomic blast. We know this type of heat was produced in Sodom and Gomorrah because of evidence found on the existing ruins. When you look at the ash shapes that look like buildings, one can see unusual wavy lines in the ash. It has been theorized that these wavy lines are the result of something called thermal ionization. When atoms repel each other, forming the swirling patterns in the ash, these patterns are found all over the ash ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah. How did the fire get that hot? The answer may be that the brimstone or sulfur mixed in with it. Sulfur burns incredibly hot, and sulfur balls, millions of them, can be found in the Sodom and Gomorrah ruins. When analyzed in a laboratory, this sulfur is more pure than found anywhere else on Earth, 95%. Typical sulfur is found somewhere more like 60% pure. But the remaining 5% of trace elements like magnesium found in these specific sulfur balls made the fire burn even hotter. It must have been simply incredible. What happens to a human body at those temperatures? They are vaporized immediately, and all that remains is a small pile of salt. So possibly that is what the Bible refers to when it says she was turned into salt. Interestingly, there are salt deposits throughout the ruins. Are these the remains of the inhabitants? The Apostle Peter spoke of these ashen remains. He condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who would live ungodly lives thereafter. Peter told us they are to be left to us as an example, as is the account of Lot's wife. Jesus told us that as well. Let's see how we should apply this. But first, as we said earlier, this channel presents scripture and interpretations you might not be getting anywhere else. And if you like what you're hearing so far, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell notification to keep seeing videos just like this. That is the best way you can support this channel. So let's get back and put all this together and see what we can learn from this account in order to apply it. On the day Jesus returns, there will be a great separation of the righteous from the wicked. One will be taken, one will be left behind, just as Lot was taken to safety in Sodom. We also see that God's angels are the vehicles that help to take the righteous to safety. That is exactly what we see in Matthew 24:30-31 as well, where angels gather together the elect. And on that same day, Jesus tells us fire and brimstone will fall on the unrighteous after the righteous are taken to safety. But is there the possibility of some of the righteous turning back and being judged? That is an incredible thought that I have never heard discussed before. But Jesus' plain warning seems to make it obvious that it's possible. It will be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, the one who is on the housetop and whose goods are in the house must not go down to take them out. And likewise, the one who is in the field must not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. Jesus is specific. This occurs on that day, the day he is revealed from heaven, the day of the rapture. Our culture has assumed the rapture is some kind of automatic thing where we are teleported into the presence of Jesus. But it seems those who live to that point will have a choice in the matter when Jesus' angels come to get them. So why would anyone not choose to go with Jesus? Why did Lot's wife choose not to go to safety? Love of family members might be one reason. If you are asked to go and your children are not, how would you react? Salvation is an individual thing. If you love your family, though, more than Jesus, you might choose to stay behind. As incredible as it seems, some people might try to take their stuff with them. The text of Luke 17 implies this. After having spent the entire time of the Great Tribulation running from persecution, the few things a person might have accumulated would seem very, very valuable to them. So, is the rapture a final test of what we love and what we place our trust in? If you love and trust Jesus, you'll fly away with him. If you love the world, maybe you stay. Our Christian culture never discusses this, but they really should. This is something every Christian should be prepared for. Lot's wife is an example for us, and the ruins of Sodom are meant to be an example to those who would live unrighteous lives. Scripture tells us so directly. What can you do personally to get the word out today? Well, one thing is to share this video on social media and on websites. Maybe bookmark it so you can have it ready to share at a moment's notice. The other thing is to learn as much as you can about the ruins of Sodom itself. What were those cities like? What are the current ruins like? What was life like in the cities prior to their destruction? Well, click right here to keep watching. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.